Grimdark has long been an incredibly popular and widespread genre in the wargaming world. The aesthetics are immediately recognizable when you see them, but sometimes, specifically stating those characteristics can be a little tricky. So on its own, that's fine, but when you're trying to give your models that grimdark look, having some guidelines to work from can be incredibly helpful. So, that's why I've tried to distill Grimdark's essence into 5 points, and in this video I'll be showing you how to recreate them on your miniatures. And to help me demonstrate these 5 points, I've chosen some miniatures from the Song of the Dormant. Now this is the new 2-player star set for Corvus Belli's medieval fantasy tabletop game, Warcrow, who are also the sponsors of this video. Warcrow is a small model count, narrative-focused game that sits somewhere in between dungeon crawlers and wargames, which makes spending that little bit of extra time to make the miniatures your own much more worthwhile. It's also still a fairly young game, so it's easy to start and catch up with everything. And speaking of getting started, the Song of the Dormant gives you everything you need to play Warcrow 2. You get 14 miniatures plus all the cards, tokens, and rules to play them. You even get a gaming mat and some terrain. I'll include a link below to where you can find out more about the game and pick up a box for yourself. Now from the box I selected these particular miniatures, the Gisamier of the Feudum. In their original form, these miniatures are quite clean cut and pristine, which will make my future modifications that much more impactful. So, with the models picked out, let's get started with the first aspect of Grimdark. Decay and Entropy. Most Grimdark settings feature dominions that are well past their prime. Maybe they're emerging from some sort of cataclysmic event, or they're currently in the middle of one. Either way, the resources that they once had access to are no longer present, leading to a crumbling of society, both in the literal and metaphorical sense. And representing this aspect on a miniature is incredibly simple. It involves adding damage to the armor, weapons, clothing, and equipment of your miniatures. For my Gisamier models, I began with my knife and cut in a series of dents, gashes, and scratches across both the hard and soft surfaces of the miniature. In addition to using my knife, I also broke up my pin vise and drilled in a series of very shallow holes. This created the effect of small divots and dents that added to the overall shoddiness that I was creating. You may also notice that I'm making all of these changes before assembly. It's just easier to reach into all those nooks and crannies without the arms and weaponry getting in the way. Once I'd added plenty of damage to the miniatures, I could finally start assembling them together, making them ready for my second aspect of Grimdark. Moral ambiguity and corruption. Most Grimdark settings tend to stay away from the usual good guy versus bad guy tropes, with even the most virtuous factions demonstrating contradictory behaviors. As such, these settings normally use symbols of faith, nobility, and righteousness to contrast and emphasize their more dreadful aspects. To represent this on a model, I decided to take some tilt shields from the Grey Knights kit. The association of knights and nobility that these decorations have would offer me that contrast. After adding a little battle damage, they were glued to the left shoulders. This aesthetic was continued with the addition of some holy relics. Again, religion and faith often feature heavily within these settings, with dogmatic principles being the driving force behind entire factions. These were sourced from both the Bretonnian Foot Knight kit and also various Space Marine kits. For my final representation of moral ambiguity, I next took some purity seals, clipped away the wax seal, and glued these to various points of the models. Violence and brutality. With my knightly armor and religious artifacts in place, I needed something to contrast against them while simultaneously representing that brutal reality present within the Grimdark setting. And once again, my Dead Animal Bits kit proved very useful by providing me with some grisly trophies. After grabbing a few hands and a severed head, I cut away part of the spike from one hand and mounted this to the tilt shield so that just the spike was left visible through the palm. I also trimmed down a hooked head and mounted this to the banner, adjacent to the relic and just below the tilt shield. Finally, a second hooked hand was also trimmed and mounted onto one of the model's belts. Cynicism about power. Another common theme in Grimdark is societal oppression. Either through the weight of a sprawling bureaucracy, an oppressive theocracy, the rule of a self-proclaimed benevolent dictator, or other autocratic governance. Now, representing this rather nebulous concept onto a physical miniature is tricky, but not impossible. My approach to this problem was to incorporate the use of chains and locks to represent the strict control that these soldiers are under. Their lives are not their own, their destiny is controlled by their superiors. So, armed with an Empire Flagellance kit, I clipped down a few chains and dotted these across the models, with a few being attached directly to their backs. For the padlocks, I once again returned to the Bretonnian Foot Knights and liberated a few from the Reliquary banner before attaching a few of these across one of the minis. From here, the models were complete, and all I needed to do before painting was to glue them to their bases. Bleak and hopeless tone. My fifth and final aspect of GRIMDARK is the dismal nature of these universes. There is little hope, with both the huge empires and lowliest peon having poor prospects, and in order to represent this dreary tone, I decided to paint the miniatures to reflect this. Now, rather than explicitly describing the exact colours and steps I use for these models, I want to focus more on the intention I had with my choices. That way, you can vary the colours used on your own models while still maintaining the intended result. After starting out with a dark primer, blacks and browns work very well here, I next began by laying down some base coats. For these, I specifically chose earthy tones, browns, greys, desaturated oranges, colours you could imagine seeing in a forest during the late autumn. Colours that are drab and lacking in vibrancy. These will form the bulk of your model's colour. But that's not to say that small spots of colour are not effective. For my miniatures, I decided to paint the helmets and tilt shields with some red and a very small amount of light grey. I personally settled on red as it not only blends nicely into the surrounding browns, but its association with blood also helps to build upon the darker themes. You don't have to use red though, pretty much any bright colour can be used provided it is used sparingly or in isolation. With all of my base colours in place, I wanted to push that aspect of dirt, grime and overall feeling of decay, but first I need to protect my existing layers with a coat of gloss varnish. To add that dirt and grime, I had a few options. There are some fantastic enamel-based products like Streak and Grime, as well as things like powder pigments, but ultimately I decided to keep things simple and break out the Newsh again. This is an acrylic medium that you can mix into your other paints, where it slows down the drying process, allowing you to adjust and remove as you please. To create that grimy look, I used a few different dark browns and applied the mixtures quite liberally across the surfaces. As I wiped away the excesses from these areas, the paint remained in the recesses to create the appearance of accumulated rust, dirt, and general staining. After layering up all of that dirt, I then proceeded to bring out the details with some highlights. For these, I simply followed the lead of the base coats and used some lighter versions of their original base colour. After tackling all of the earlier painted areas, I also used a step to pick out the metallics. By limiting the application of the metallics to just highlights, this helped to create the impression of scratches on painted or corroded surfaces, revealing the original material beneath. From here, the miniatures were painted and I could turn my attention to the base, another area that I could use to represent that bleak and hopeless tone. I began with some miniature razor wire and wrapped it around a piece of wood. The wood helped hold it in place while I applied some dirty down rust over the top. This stuff is great for achieving realistic rust effects quickly and easily. Simply apply it across your surface and allow it to dry. With my rusty razor wire prepped, it was then coiled and glued across the bases. To finish off, I then filled in the remaining space with some of AK Interactive's Muddy Ground texture paste. When combined with the razor wire, it gave the base the appearance of an early 20th century battlefield. This is somewhat anachronistic considering the arms and armor of the models, but this all helps to feed into that grimdark trope of mashing up the obsolete and high-tech. Once the muddy ground had dried, I was left with this. And here we have the 4 GRIMDARK transformed Gisamier. Now that the models are complete, you can see how all of the small elements have combined to create something that is distinctly dark and grim in appearance. Individually, these changes are small and quite easy to achieve, but put them together and you can massively change the spirit of your models. So regardless of what game you're playing or miniatures you're building, if you're looking to grimdarken your collection, then hopefully these tips will prove useful. I'll include a list of all the parts and paints used in this video down in the description below, along with some affiliate links to where you can pick them up from. And as I mentioned earlier, if you're interested in picking up a box of dead animal bits for yourself and you're in the UK or US, then you can check out my website, www.sparepartsemporium.com. If you're in the EU or other parts of the world, then you can find them on the Wargames Atlantic web store as well. But before I go, let me just say a huge thank you to everyone who continues to help keep the channel going. And if you'd like to support me too, you can get early access to ad-free videos, exclusive merchandise, and even your name in the credits. Simply follow my Patreon link below or hit the join button. Just like my top Patreon supporters did, who are Nail5, Andrew Butler, Banyevrian, Berserker, Dakota Gaburi, Daniel Dowling, Eben Halls, George Kanzini Roberts, Immaterial Creations, Cornbread, Little Templar, Maciej Savitsky, Matt Brower, Molly Mork, Neil Vickers, Older Than Time, Sam Sepulveda, Swedsman, and Tim. And my top channel members, who are AM, Bon Johnson, Daniel Reese, Dave, Doug H, Dwarf of War, Goose, Guy Bazant, John Gibbs, Mark Taylor, Musa Bogon, Durnington Paint, Omni Tom, Patrick K, Philip Oya, Ryan O'Shaughnessy, S.O., Satoran, S.J. Carper, Tactical Batman, The Sire Acquired, Tillo, and Whale Tussler. So until next time, thanks for watching, and goodbye.